calls to delay compulsory COVID vaccines for frontline NHS staff in England. As some workers took to the streets to protest, doctors say forcing people to get jabbed will exacerbate staff shortages.
If we lose these staff, it will impact on the quality of care that we're able to provide for patients, the access, and it'll put extra pressure on those staff who are remaining.
US military hardware arrives in Ukraine. America calls it lethal aid as Russian troops remain camped on the border. The Tory MP who says the government has tried to blackmail colleagues who want to oust Boris Johnson will meet the police to discuss his claims.
He dives! He is there!
And Dave Riding makes history, winning Britain's first ever gold in the Alpine Skiing World Cup. Good evening. The Royal College of GPs says there should be a delay to the introduction of compulsory COVID jabs for frontline NHS workers in England because of concerns over staff shortages. Staff must have a first jab by February the 3rd and be fully vaccinated by April the 1st to continue in frontline roles, and around 80,000 health workers remain unvaccinated. Hundreds of people marched in cities across England to protest against the policy, but the Department of Health says there are no plans to delay it. Here's Catherine da Costa.
Hundreds of healthcare workers gathered in London, calling for the government's no jab, no job policy in England to be scrapped. They're among large crowds of anti-vax demonstrators. NHS uniforms were thrown at police in protest.
We've all got choices. We're born with choices, yeah? So you shouldn't be thought, I work for the NHS, and I'm the only member of staff in my workplace that have not been vaccinated, and I've been threatened to losing my job come April, and I will not be vaccinated.
Frontline NHS staff, including GPs and dentists, as well as non-clinical roles such as receptionists and porters, will need to have had at least 2 COVID vaccines by the start of April, unless they're medically exempt. More than 90% of healthcare workers are double jabbed, but 70 to 80,000 are still thought to be unvaccinated.
But there are a small number of people.
Some want to delay the deadline, warning the health service can't afford to lose more people.
The risks are very significant for the functioning of the NHS. We are already short of staff in all parts of the NHS. If we lose these staff, it will impact on the quality of care that we're able to provide for patients, the access, and it'll put extra pressure on those staff who are remaining.
Staff have less than a fortnight to get their first jab in order to be fully vaccinated by the deadline. Health chiefs say mandating vaccines is the right thing to do to protect patients and are encouraging more staff to get their first, second and third jabs.
It's so important as healthcare professionals that we're protected. But if you're not yet, you know that there are options available for you to have conversations with senior clinicians within your trust or organisation to help make that really important decision. And people are coming forward all the time to make sure that they're protected, their families are protected, and that their patients are protected as well.
A similar policy has already been brought in for those working in social care in England, with care homes warning it's exacerbated staff shortages. Scotland and Wales have decided against compulsory vaccination for health and care staff, while Northern Ireland's planning to consult on whether jabs should be mandatory for new recruits. Catherine da Costa, BBC News.
Let's take a look now at the latest government figures. And there were over 76,800 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. But that figure doesn't include Scotland or Wales. On average, just over 91,700 new cases were reported per day in the last week. The latest figures show there were just under 18,000 people in hospital being treated for coronavirus on Thursday. 297 deaths were reported in the latest 24-hour period. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive test, although there will be some amongst that number who won't have died from COVID. The figures don't include Wales. On average, in the past week, 270 deaths were announced every day. On vaccinations, over 36.8 million people have had a booster jab. William Ragg, the Conservative MP who accused Downing Street of trying to blackmail some MPs who want to oust Boris Johnson, says he's due to meet the police next week to discuss his claims. Downing Street says it's not seen any evidence to support the allegations, but would look closely if proof were presented. It comes amid reports that gatherings in Mr Johnson's flat are also part of Sue Gray's investigation into Downing Street parties. Here's our political correspondent, Damien Grammaticus.
Already under pressure, the coming days could prove decisive for Boris Johnson. Now there's a new concern. The fact that one of the main rebel MPs who've already written letters of no confidence in him is due to talk to the police possibly on Monday. The MP, William Ragg, this week alleged he'd been told others had faced threats. They might lose funding for their constituencies if they didn't back the Prime Minister.
The intimidation of a Member of Parliament is a serious matter. Moreover, the reports of which I'm aware would seem to constitute blackmail.
On Wednesday, Mr Johnson was there when another of the rebels, Christian Wakeford, defected to Labour. He claims he was told some time ago funding for a school might not happen if he didn't support the government over free school meals. Today, a senior Labour MP said he'd heard more claims.
I must have spoken to about a dozen Tory MPs in the last few days who have made similar allegations about whips either offering to withdraw financial support for their constituencies, either from the political parties, so for campaigning, or for their constituents.
But Conservative MPs are airing all this publicly, and one even says he'll go to the police about his own party. Tells you much about tensions in the ranks. Here, Downing Street says it's seen no evidence and would take it seriously if it did. So, important question for the coming week. Will any Tory MP step forward and corroborate the claims?
I have voted against the government on occasions when I thought it right. And I have to say, I've always had a very close relationship with the Chief Whip, and indeed a very productive relationship with Whip. So I'm waiting to hear more about this, because it's not something I've seen or been told about.
But the inquiry by the civil servant Sue Gray into Downing Street parties due this week poses the biggest risk for the Prime Minister. It's now reported she's also looking into events in his private flat too. The question for Boris Johnson, who's at the official country retreat of Chequers, can he survive it unscathed? He's thought to be busy plotting his strategy and calling his MPs, trying to secure their support.
Damien joins me now. Damien, there's another claim tonight against the government, and this time from a former minister.
Yes, very serious one too. So this is Nusgani, who was elected in 2015, became a junior minister. She lost that job in 2020. She's told the Sunday Times that when she went to the whips and asked them why she lost the job, she was told that her Muslimness was raised as an issue in the discussions about who should continue in the cabinet at that point, or as ministers at that point. And her status as a Muslim woman was making colleagues feel uncomfortable. Now, she says that she tried to pursue this and said that she got threats from the whips that if she persisted, she would be ostracised and her career and reputation would be destroyed. So she didn't pursue it. I have to say that the whips, a spokesperson for the whips has said this evening, these claims are categorically untrue. The Conservative Party does not tolerate any form of racism or discrimination. But Nadhim Zahawi, who is a minister now, has already come out in support of Nusgani, saying there's no place for Islamophobia or any form of racism in our party. This has to be investigated properly. So that alone will ensure this continues. And that's right ahead of a make or break week for the Prime Minister.
Damien, thank you. A senior Conservative MP says the UK must do more to support Ukraine as Russian troops gather at its border. Tobias Ellwood, who chairs the Commons Defence Committee, said he thought an invasion was now imminent and that President Putin was taking full advantage of a weakened West. Russia has denied that it's planning an invasion, but the US has delivered 90 tons of what it calls lethal aid to Ukraine, the first shipment since a fresh promise of assistance from President Biden. James Waterhouse reports now from the Ukrainian capital, Kiev.
The Friendship of Nations Arch, built by the Soviets to celebrate the closeness between Russians and Ukrainians. That crack was painted on by activists a few years ago as relations between the two countries deteriorated. And as talks intensify about a possible invasion, the hope is things don't break down completely. Tensions are still rising on the border. Today, Russian jets made their way to joint military drills with neighbouring Belarus. Ukrainian ministers have welcomed a delivery of US military equipment and now a call for the UK to step up its own support. The British government has delivered 2,000 anti-tank missiles this week and says it's open to sending more weapons as President Putin continues to up the pressure.
He's actually boxed himself into a corner because so much effort has been put into this. But he also recognised that he will never again be as strong as this to take advantage of the West's weakness. I suspect an invasion is now imminent.
So does Kiev feel like a city preparing for an invasion? Evelyn and Lillian are too small to appreciate the power struggle surrounding their country. But their parents, Serhiy and Valeria, obviously aren't.
It's definitely concerning. It definitely seems more tense than the past times that we were concerned about this. I'd say it's definitely increasing, like anxiety and stuff, for sure.
I don't feel good that I cannot come back to my hometown easily because I always have to think whether I will be able to do it safely or not. And of course I'm afraid.
If I see others do it, I'm ready to defend my country. I'm not going to run away, but then again, there might not be anywhere to run away to.
Moscow denies that it's planning an invasion, but it's easy to forget Ukraine's already endured 8 years of Russian aggression. It's brought fighting, cyber attacks, misinformation, and constant uncertainty. Next week, the US will continue to discuss Russia's demands that NATO will both scale back its military presence and rule out ever letting Ukraine join. For the country at the heart of it, that uncertainty goes on. James Waterhouse, BBC News in Kiev.
Paul Adams, our diplomatic correspondent, is with me. Paul, each side is gearing up on the ground, but diplomacy is still going on.
You know, on the face of it, it does look pretty bleak, doesn't it? You know, when you see all those arms and equipment just pouring in, it's a bit like a gun on a table early on in a movie. You kind of get the feeling that at some point someone is going to use it. And there are lots of people, you heard Tobias Ellwood there, who think that war is pretty much inevitable now. But you're right, there is an awful lot of diplomacy going on. Antony Blinken and Sergei Lavrov didn't settle anything when they met in Geneva, but Mr. Blinken did agree to give Mr. Lavrov a written answer to those sweeping Russian demands. Once that's in, it's possible that the two men, and maybe even their bosses, will decide to meet again. And there are others involved. Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, is almost certainly going to Moscow to meet his counterpart in the coming days. That'll be the first meeting of its kind for something like 9 years. So while the talking goes on, that obviously buys time for Ukraine to get ready, for all of these arms to go in, to help them prepare, and for this the West to prepare this massive package of sanctions that we've been hearing about for quite a long time now. But it has to be said, there is absolutely no sign yet that when Mr. Blinken gives his reply to Mr. Lavrov, it will in any way meet the kind of enormous sweeping demands that we heard about there in James's piece. What then? Is there something the Americans can offer that will satisfy Mr. Putin? That is the conundrum.
Paul, many thanks. Paul Adams there. Time for all the sport now. Here's Lizzie Greenwood-Hughes at the BBC Sports Centre. Lizzie.
Thank you, Rita. Good evening. Slalom skier Dave Riding says he never stopped believing after he became the first Briton to win an Alpine World Cup event. The 35-year-old, who learnt to ski on a dry slope in Lancashire, will now head off to his 4th Winter Olympics. Adam Wild reports.
British alpine skiing has never before reached such heights. In more than half a century of World Cup competition, there isn't a Brit who's done what Dave Riding was doing here. 6th after his opening run, by the time he'd reached the bottom of his 2nd, Riding was on top.
He dips, he dives, he is there! Come on! Yes!
In the lead, now only one other skier could stop him.
Finazza out of the gate, and Riding! Great Britain has won!
Always happens when you don't expect it, you know. It's been a long road. It was more disbelief when I realised I'd done it. I didn't know what to say. Just, it was crazy.
Winning World Cup gold seems a world away from the dry slopes of Britain. This was how Riding learned to ski, often having to dodge sheep, a skill that would come in useful on the slalom snow. Now at 35, he's become the event's oldest ever World Cup winner. The Winter Olympics are less than a fortnight away, and in the Alpine snow, British skiing hopes are warming up nicely. Adam Wilde, BBC News.
Match of the day and sports scene in Scotland are on after the news, so don't listen if you want to wait for the football action. Although the story at Brentford's home defeats to Wolves was mostly from matters off the pitch, with a drone causing a lengthy stoppage before Brentford's manager was sent off at full time for arguing with the referee. At Goodison Park, a supporter was arrested after what appeared to be an object thrown at the celebrating Aston Villa players. Newcastle had a rare win at Leeds. Manchester United beat West Ham with virtually the last kick of the game, and Southampton held leaders Manchester City to a draw. Hearts are safely through to the Scottish Cup fourth round after thrashing part-timers Auchinleck Talbot 5-0. Elsewhere, holders St Johnstone weren't so lucky, knocked out by League Two leaders Kelty Hearts. Britain's last hope in the singles at the Australian Open tennis has been knocked out. Dan Evans lost in straight sets in the third round in Melbourne, beaten by the Canadian ninth seed Felix Auger-Aliassime. Ulster Rugby remain unbeaten in Europe this season. They survived a late scare in their final Champions Cup pool game against Clermont-Auvergne to win it 34-31 and go through to the knockout stages as joint pool winners. Well, all the day's rugby scores are on the BBC Sport website, as well as the latest from the cricket as England's men play the West Indies and the women continue their Ashes series. But that's it from me. Back to you, Reeta.
Thank you, Lizzie. And that's all from us. The Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, and the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, are among Sophie Rayworth's guests tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. on BBC One. Good night.